Hello, hello. Today we're going to talk about catchment areas. First thing you need to know is that the term catchment area means the exact same thing as watershed. Okay, so catchment area, watershed, same thing. Okay, so let's look at what a catchment area is. A catchment area, first of all, you can imagine when it rains, we're going to look at some mountains, and we're going to look at a ravine, maybe some low area between the mountains. You can imagine that when it rains, okay, and it rains on the side of the mountain, it's going to land here, and then it's going to make maybe a stream, and then it's going to go down, and any rain over here might land on that mountain and join that river, and the same thing, right? And that's going to happen all along. And water from rain is going to join small streams to bigger streams, and to a small river, and then a big river, and then eventually it'll empty out to a body of water. It could be a lake, or it could be an ocean, right? Okay. A catchment area is the area that feeds one body of water. So you can imagine that a raindrop falling on this side of the mountain will actually go into this catchment area and join this body of water. If rain falls on the other side of the mountain, it's going to go in another direction and go to another body of water. So when you're looking at catchment areas, what limits the area for a catchment area is the mountains. So let's draw the limit of this catchment area. It would be something like that, right? Because all the rain that lands in this area will end up feeding this one body of water. Any rain outside of this area, rain that lands on this side of the mountain, is going to go to a different catchment area. Okay, so what limits a catchment area? It's the highland. It's the mountaintops or hilltops. Okay, next thing you need to know is what happens if there is pollution that enters water. Well, let's look at this situation, and we're going to imagine that somebody dumps some contamination here, right? First of all, it will affect the person there, right? If the person drinks from that spot, they're going to get that pollution. No surprise, water goes downhill. So if we have somebody over here, that pollution will actually end up affecting them. Will it affect somebody over here? No, because for the pollution to get to this spot, it would actually have to go uphill. So this person has relatively clean drinking water. And likewise up here, that pollution would not be able to go uphill. Okay. In general, the places downstream end up with more pollution because they will get pollution from any source along this river. Places upstream are getting the fresher, cleaner water from the rain, as a general rule. Next thing you need to know for catchment areas is what happens when pollutants enter the water. Okay, there are 4 consequences. You need to just memorize them, just practice them. Okay. First thing, where do pollutants come from? Pollutants can come from our cities. When rain lands on our streets, it takes lots of garbage into the rivers. It can come from farmers' fields. When it rains, all the fertilizer, that organic stuff that they put for the plants, all that fertilizer can get washed away into rivers. And there's not much we can do about that, right? When it rains, it's going to carry that stuff, it's going to dissolve it, it's going to carry it into rivers, and it's huge farmlands. It's really, there's no way to get that to stop the river. The water, the rain, it has to go somewhere, and it's going to end up in a river, and it's going to take some of those fertilizers with it. And also the pollutants can come from industry and factories and things like that. So pollution can come from cities, from fertilizers, farmers' fields, and from factories, right? Amongst other things. So first consequence when pollution enters a waterway. Well, one of them is when rain lands on farmers' fields, it washes away some of the fertilizer. That fertilizer has dissolved minerals, okay, salts and things like that. Now, there are some dissolved minerals in rivers, but it's not much. So when you add all those minerals from fertilizers, you're really disrupting the balance of the minerals in the river, right? You're adding extra stuff, salts and things that the river isn't really supposed to have that much of. Second thing, you can imagine if we dump toxic pollutants, it can kill fish and plants. That's not really a surprise. It happens quite often, especially when factories dump toxic stuff. Not good. Third thing, this one's not so obvious. Human diseases. We get our drinking water from rivers and streams, and a lot of those pollutants that are dissolved in there, we don't really do much to take them out. We filter out the solid stuff, we add chlorine to kill bacteria, but some of those pollutants can get into our drinking water. Now, our drinking water is really safe, but even so, not good, right? Some of those diseases can be cancer, also something called autoimmune diseases. It means that basically your white blood cells get confused and start attacking your own body. And the last one is a fancy word called eutrophication. Eutrophication is what happens when we dump stuff into rivers and lakes, stuff that can rot, organic stuff. That could be toilet water, that could be waste food, it could be fertilizers, organic stuff from fertilizers, stuff that can rot. And when that stuff goes into lakes and rivers, there's a whole sequence of steps of things that happen that you kind of just have to learn. The first one is that the organic matter, this stuff that can rot, will actually make algae grow. You've seen this in fish tanks. If somebody doesn't clean their fish tank in a while, you'll see it starts to turn green. Those are small plants. When the algae grows and there's too much of it, it will sort of die off and new algae will grow. But the algae that dies falls to the bottom, and then you end up with bacteria that starts eating away at this dead stuff. The bacteria, just like any animal, breathes in the oxygen from the water and breathes out CO2, but it's taking the oxygen, the dissolved oxygen, out of the water, which plants and animals need. So bacteria will use up the oxygen, and the fish will die because they don't have oxygen. When the fish die, they will release all the stuff that was in their bodies, which can be toxic. They'll release that into the river, which is even makes more bacteria and makes more pollution, and it's a bad cycle. So you just have to learn eutrophication, say it many times, eutrophication, and organic matter goes into the river, algae feeds off of that, the dead algae falls to the bottom, and bacteria basically decompose it. As they're decomposing it, they use up the oxygen in the water. If there's no oxygen in the water, the fish will die, and when the fish die, they release what's inside them, which can be also toxic. Okay, so to sum up, a watershed is the same thing as a catchment area. The boundaries for a catchment area are the high ground, tops of mountains and hills. So you could draw the limits to a catchment area. A catchment area is an area that feeds the water to one body of water, so to one lake or one place. Pollution tends to go downstream, so it will not affect places that are upstream. Places that are downstream tend to gather more pollution. And lastly, you need to know the consequences of having pollution in water, and that is extra minerals in the water. It affects or kills plants and animals. Can cause human diseases because we get our drinking water from these lakes and rivers. And the last thing is eutrophication, which happens when stuff that can rot, organic stuff, ends up in the water, which causes algae. Then bacteria feed off the algae, take all the oxygen, and when there's no oxygen, the fish die. Okay, hope this helps.